Hey Google, stop the music. Alright, let's crack into it, shall we? The things I do for good sound. I have turned off the air conditioning and all of the fans in my apartment to film this video, so you better fucking like it. I'm not gonna address the elephant in the room. Just kidding, I am. In my last video, which was in January, I said, I am not a consistent bitch, I'm gonna be honest. Maybe I'll love this so much that I'll just easily do a video a week or whatever. I don't think it's likely. I'm gonna try. That's all we can do. I didn't succeed, obviously. It's August, and it's August. So anyway, let's just talk about it, actually. Let's just talk about the thing. I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this. Liking something does not mean it's good. But Sarah, what about— No exceptions. Now, there are a lot of things that are objectively good, like ravioli. And there are also a lot of things that are objectively good but not enjoyable, like jury duty. But when we're talking about art, isn't everything subjective? Isn't beauty just in the eye of the beholder? No. In every form of art, there's also craft. Now, please understand that there are actually a lot of ways to distinguish between art and craft, and a lot of them are actually misogynistic. More on that later, probably. So to start off this video, let's establish what I mean by these terms for the purposes of this video. Craft is the study or practice of technique and skill pertaining to the final creation of a product. Art is anything that is product of human creativity. There's no inherent skill or education needed to create art. It doesn't even have to be good. Which brings us to good. Wait a second, doesn't everyone know what good means? No, probably not, and this is something that I could talk about for a long time. So I will. Good has significant moral implications. Good is an all or nothing scenario, and if something isn't good, then it's probably bad, which also has moral implications. Personally, I find both concepts really reductive and frankly unnecessary, so I don't even use the terms good and bad in my daily language as much as I can. I highly recommend everybody try that for at least like a week. It's really life-changing. Anyway, good in the context of this video means well done, well executed, completed. Conversely, bad in this context is the opposite. Unfinished, unedited, incomplete, poorly done, inconsistent, incorrect. Hi, Lita. Notice how enjoyable and fun are not in either of those definitions? That's because they actually have very little to do with each other. Now that we've established what I mean by these terms, let's talk about how they all work together. Let's start with the ideal outcome for any piece of art, being both good and enjoyable. These pieces of art are typically what end up being referred to as classics, and they outlive their creators. Things like books, paintings, music, films, anything that people are talking about decades or even centuries after it's been created, things that people are still emulating, those are what we'd probably consider to be good, as in enjoyable and well done. An excellent example of this is The Last Supper, which is a painting by Leonardo da Vinci. People still copy it to this day to learn important lessons about structure, composition, and storytelling, even though the painting is like several hundred years old. It's kind of a foundational piece of art, in fact. Sometimes things fall into this category for that reason. Da Vinci was able to make significant progress within the art world because he was able to perfect perspective. That's something that every artist since then has built on. Similarly, Shakespeare is not remembered just for being a good writer because his plays are funny, even though they are. It's also because he invented words that we use every day, like bedroom or eyeball. Good plus well done usually equals something that changes culture or becomes part of cultural zeitgeist in some way. In literature, books that check both the good and well-executed boxes typically become classics. Now, the average book reader in 2024 has probably read maybe 5 to 10 classics, and they were probably mostly done in school. The language does tend to be difficult, because people spoke differently, and many people totally avoid them because they think they're going to be dry or boring. In response to this, I will read you one of my favorite quotes from a classic book by Jane Austen, Persuasion. He had, in fact, though his sisters were now doing all they could for him by calling him Poor Richard, been nothing better than a thick-headed, unfeeling, unprofitable Dick Musgrove. Nola, stop it. Dick Musgrove, who had never done anything to entitle himself to more than the abbreviation of his name, living or dead. In case you didn't catch that, here's the 2024 translation. His sisters called him Poor Richard, and everyone else called him Dick, which was the name that he deserved. I truly think the thing that I love so much about classics is that it reminds me that humans have always been how humans are now. I'd also like to point out that classics do not have to be old. There's this perception that classics have to be 100 plus years old in order to count, but in reality, a lot of classics are old simply because humans have written like a fuck ton of books over the time that we've had language. So even if only one book a year goes into the classic territory, just as an example, a majority of the books that we've written would still be old as hell. Also, literacy is a somewhat new concept in Western civilization. Most people could not read a book, let alone write one, until education became more of a standard and child labor laws were enacted. This means that many of the books prior to laws like this being instated would have been written by people who already have the craft down simply because of their education. So what about when books are good but not fun? Honestly, I feel like Lapvona by Ottessa Moshfegh is the perfect example of this. And if you enjoyed this book, sorry. I'm sorry. Talk to your therapist about it, I guess. Anyway, Lapvona is beautifully written garbage. I don't think it's controversial for me to say that because it's not pretending to be anything else. The book is literally just irredeemable as far as the actual subject matter and characters go. It is abject misery topped with some religious drama. Here's a passage that I think demonstrates what I mean without being too graphic, because this book actually does offer very graphic depictions of child rape, child abuse, regular rape, cannibalism, and more. William wondered at the bleeding eye sockets. The horse blinked its long lashes, neighed, and seemed to stare deeply at Willem, who kissed it on its dry black nose. The feeling of chapped skin against his lips elicited a thought, a revelation. "This horse is a revelation," he said. Then he snapped his fingers and demanded the stable boys do a little dance for him. He clapped along to the rhythm of their feet. Willem felt very happy. Of all of those at the manor, he was the only one to appreciate that the horse had found its way home without sight. That was loyalty. Forget Dibra. She, like Luca, would get what she deserved. Willem would not lament his wife's disappearance. No, he would celebrate. Something good was coming. Willem believed this with all his heart, as much as he believed himself to be at the heart of all things. Hallelujah! And just like that, thunder clapped, and the sky filled with black clouds. You see? Willem cried. He kissed the blind horse's snout again and trudged back up to the manor, just in time to stay out of the rain. Now for context, this is immediately after Willem's wife, Dibra, runs away with her lover, Luca. They are then killed on the road, and at some point, Dibra's horse has its eyes ripped out by the loco pedal witch, who then takes those horse eyes and puts them in her face to replace her blind eyes because she's like 2,000 years old. What the actual fuck? As much as I hated this book, and I really, really did, I can recognize that Ottessa Moshfegh is a master of this craft. This book is gruesome, and it doesn't pretend to be otherwise. But it's so well written that you can almost ignore all of that. Or, I mean, I couldn't, but maybe you could. I was thoroughly skeeved out even before we got to the cannibalism part. Here's another bit. Malik closed his eyes and prayed until the bandit stopped wailing. He opened them in time for the bandit to spit in his face. He knew not to flinch, as it would show disgust, and God would judge him. Instead, he bent down and kissed the bandit's head, and then licked his lips to taste the salt of the man's sweat and the rancid oil caked in his reddish hair. It's like, I didn't make this up. That's what the book says. I want to say, again, if you did genuinely enjoy this book, or any other book I mention, this video is not meant to be bashing your taste. It really isn't. We're not talking about my preferences here. I think newer readers, in particular, have not yet been able to make the distinction between I like this and this is good. And I think that's causing some mayhem. What mayhem, you may ask? Well, I mostly mean the giving every book 5 stars and completely ignoring that stars actually mean something in a rating system, and if you give everything 5 stars, it actually makes the entire world of rating collapse on itself because nothing means anything anymore. I also mean all of the times that I have had someone honest to God tell me to my actual face over the internet that me saying that a book isn't good for like structural reasons, grammatical reasons even, is the same as saying anyone who enjoys it is stupid and shouldn't be allowed to read. Like, they actually said that. So let's talk about bad books. Disclaimer, if your favorite book is mentioned in this section of the video, guess what? Me too. Some of my favorite books are bad with a capital B. Utter trash. I'm a better and more rounded person and reader because I can recognize that without it raising my blood pressure. I've heard the argument lately that there have just been a litany of bad books being published, and frankly, I agree. I have seen more blatantly obvious grammatical errors in these books that are being actually published and somehow making it to the New York Times bestseller list or any bestseller list than when I was grading papers in high school of people who ended their whole thing with, and that's why I, like, bad writing, and this is somehow worse. And it's getting published. And yes, that was about Fourth Wing. Honestly, I don't know how some of these things made it to an editor, assuming there even was an editor involved. It would make more sense if there wasn't. You want an example? The scar that marks his eyebrow, space between eye and brow, for some reason, makes him hotter. Flaming hot. Scorching hot. Get you in trouble and you like it level hot. Bestie, girlfriend, girly pop. That is Wattpad. That is Wattpad and no more. I'm not going to use this book as an example past this for two reasons. Number one, I don't want to give this author any of my airtime, space, or energy. Number two, more importantly, far better creators have dissected this book, series, author more thoroughly than I would ever want to. Go watch those. There's nothing I can say that they haven't said. Again, if you liked this book, that is okay. But please, please do not delude yourself into thinking that it's a prosaic masterpiece. It's okay. It's not. It isn't. It isn't, and that is okay. Also, if you do like this book, I highly recommend checking out AO3, or Archive of Our Own, or Wattpad. You're gonna love that shit. That shit's for you. Now, just to prove that I am not here just to shit on people's tastes, as much as their lack of discernment, let's talk about a book series that I adore, which is also very, very bad. Twilight. Now, much like Fourth Wing, Twilight has been picked apart by much better creators than I. This is not a deep dive, and there is nothing that I can say that they haven't said already. For this video, I just want to focus on the enormous plot holes and the even worse plot hole fillers. One that really stands out to me is in Breaking Dawn. Aro and the Voturi are very surprised to see that the wolves have allied with the Cullens. That doesn't make no damn sense, because if you remember, Aro reads people's minds whether they want him to or not. He read Irina's mind, and she was voluntarily letting him see what she knew, and she knew that they had allied because her mate, Laurent, was killed by Jacob in wolf form to protect Bella. Like, she fully knew. So why didn't he know? He should have. He would have. Twilight also tries to sell us on the whole Jacob being in love with a literal infant thing is okay by a few chapters before having his friend Quill also fall in love with a different infant just to establish that it's normal in wolf world. That's not an excuse or an explanation. That's just like a pattern. They also wanted us to buy that Bella could get preggers even though Edward is dead, therefore not producing any sperm. So Renesmee looks like that because she's the product of a 100-year-old jizz. Stephenie Meyer's Mormonism is actually a better explanation than anything that she could have written. Like I said, I'm not here to say anything new or make any poignant observations. I'm here to say that this book, from a structural perspective, is hot garbage, and I love it. Twilight made me feel things. It has this angst that I feel like is unique but universal to teenage girls, and I don't think anybody's been able to replicate it quite like that. Many have tried. This book was absolutely successful because of how it made people feel, not because it was well written, and that's fine. That's art. That's the point of the video. So why does this matter? First off, nothing matters. But from the perspective of a lifelong reader who has read pretty much equal amounts of fairy smut and Russian lit, this gives some red flags to me. And the more bad books that get published, the lower the standard for publishing is going to be. And that's not me saying we should gatekeep publishing. That's me saying you can publish if you can put the comma in the right place. That's not a huge barrier for entry, especially when part of publishing is hiring someone to put the comma in the right place. America in particular already has terrible literacy rates. The average reading level of an adult in America is 5th fucking grade. That's not going to get any better if the books available to people who want to read, to people who are trying to better their reading comprehension, they can't do that if the books are just stupid. There's nothing for them to learn if we're just dropping it down to the lowest level, which is what's happening. Also, I think writers deserve better, because why the fuck are y'all putting your names on unfinished work? There's no way that you can convince me that you thought that was done. Is the check really that fat? And yes, it probably is. I do recognize that a huge driving force behind this is in fact money from the publishers. Like, it's the pushes from the publishers. At the end of the day, if the publisher is demanding from an author that they write a 600-page book every year, it's not going to get done in time. There's going to be a ton of filler. You're going to read 80% of the book and nothing's going to happen. There's this trend now where publishers are like demanding that in fantasy in particular, every series be at least 3 books. There's no standalones, and like more than 3 is ideal. I do not have any proof of this, but I really fully think that publishers are like reading a book and saying, we will buy this if you make it 3 books. Books are like 3 times longer than the story they're telling, or worse, like 3 books longer than the story they're telling. One heartbreaking example of this, in my opinion, is Children of Blood and Bone. The first book was quite good. It's not my cup of tea entirely, just because the protagonist is a little bit young for me, so it's just not inherently going to be my favorite. But it was good. Like, it was a solid series, and I love that they used West African magic systems. That was super cool. Book 2 was almost entirely the same story as book 1, but with extra characters and a love triangle, quadrangle that made no sense. And it was entirely in their dreams. I have not read the 3rd book, but I haven't seen anything positive about it, unfortunately. Even from people who like hardcore love the series up until that point, they're just not happy with it. And I really just think, like, from reading the first book, it could have been a standalone book. It probably should have, and I think it was intended to be one, where she wrote 1 book, the publisher read it, and they were like, we need it to be a trilogy or we're not buying it. So it becomes a trilogy, and then you just get 1 story over 3 books, and 80% of it is just filler. And I don't have proof that that happened, but if they had just been contented in this hypothetical situation that I've come up with, if they had just been contented with 1 solid book instead of 3 progressively worse books, this wouldn't be such a cringy thing to talk about, because we would have just been fine with it. On a much less important level, the total inability to like think critically about your ratings has destroyed Goodreads. Now, I don't typically look up a book on Goodreads before I read it, but a lot of people do, and now it's kind of just like, what is the point? A 5-star review has gone from meaning this book is beautifully written, it makes you think, it's poignant, it's gonna change you, years from now you'll still think about this book even if you never read it again, to yet another world that I wouldn't survive in. Even the sex is dangerous. I got a paper cut reading this book and I almost cried. That is a real 5-star review from Goodreads. Why is there sex in it? Why is there graphic sex in it? This is a YA book. This is a book about 17-year-olds. This is what I mean. And just like from actually reading the book, I do not think that you could take the sex in that book seriously unless you are a completely untouched version, because it's just laughable. And the target audience is untouched virgins. Like, do you see why I have a problem with this? At the end of the day, 2 things can be true at the same time. It is fine to read whatever you enjoy, and us constantly consuming poorly written books is going to increase the quality of books exponentially over time. Both things are true. So what do we do about it? Thankfully, for us at least, this is the absolute easiest problem to solve in the world. We just need to read more books and buy more books. Darn, right? Specifically, more diverse books, and I'm not even talking necessarily about the characters themselves, although that is extremely important, just a different video. I'm talking about diversity of genre, diversity of author, diversity of subject. Literally just add some diversity in there somewhere. And I get that that can be hard if you're a mood reader like I am. I literally read nothing but fantasy for over a year because that's what I was enjoying, and I had no intention of changing it until I realized I wasn't actually enjoying reading anymore. And when I started examining that, these are some red flags that were raised to me, and I realized it's because I was only reading 1 genre. Number 1, giving a pass to books that I really didn't like just because they were kind of similar to something that I did like. I think this is the one that people are the most guilty about. Liking something similar is not the same as liking this thing, and your taste is going to kind of only evolve if you can make those differentiations. I could not remember what characters went to what storyline because they were all so similar. I'm not going to say there's no point in reading something if you can't remember it, because people have memory issues. Also, enjoying something in the moment isn't a bad thing. However, if I read 8 different books, different characters, and the plot lines are so similar that I cannot remember which one is which, and I have a good memory, that is a sign that you're over-consuming in one particular category. Number 3, and I think this is the most insidious one, I never felt satisfied with a book. I would not be able to sit with the book after I finished it and just be satisfied with it. I would have to start another book immediately to continue the dopamine. Meaning I wasn't actually getting the hit from the book, it was just from the stimulation of the book, which I don't think that's a super good thing. That's the same as watching Netflix, which watching Netflix can be good, but like, to me, the point of reading is to engage your brain and to think. Just processing it that quickly is not the same as meditating on it. Does every book need to be meditated on? No. But when it's turned into a situation like I have to have the next hit, I think it's just time to like examine the habits and see if they're actually helping you. All of those things that I listed are tendencies that are similar to like addictive behavior of any type. And I do recognize that this is different for everyone. If it doesn't apply to you, as someone on Instagram recently said, and I would love to tag her if I could remember who it was, this isn't personal unless you make it personal. Now, to be clear, when I did that mental inventory, I did not change anything right away. It actually took me finishing everything within the niche that I wanted to. I literally could not find another book that was in this very specific niche. I ran out of things to read, which made me very depressed. So I hit a book slump, basically. Finally, I picked up a book that was completely outside of what I had been reading, and man, did it reset my brain in the best way. And frankly, reading the book made me realize how utterly trash a majority of the books that I had read that year actually were. That's when I realized that I was actually just picking stuff up because it was similar to what I wanted to read, not because it was a good book. In case you are wondering, the book was Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. Maybe. Probably his wife, though. I did read Anna Karenina in high school, but I just frankly didn't remember most of it because I was wildly depressed in high school. I did get it on audiobook to make it a little easier to consume, and I highly, highly recommend that you do that if you're just getting into classics, or even if you're not. Audiobook, in my opinion, is just better with classics because you don't have to figure out the tone, which is difficult when the language is not what you're familiar with. The book is long as hell. I think it was 58 hours on audiobook, and I don't speed up my audiobooks, by the way. If anything, I do 1.25, but I'm not doing any of that ×4 shit. I want to actually hear what's going on. But I prefer a long as hell book, which is probably why I'm so into fantasy. I want to fully immerse myself in the story for as long as possible and not have to get out of that brain to create another one, basically. There was this one scene in Anna Karenina that really, really shook me for absolutely no reason. It is actually a boring as hell chapter. I don't think there's any dialogue for the entire chapter. But it's just about the main character, one of the main characters, Levin. He's just mowing his lawn the whole chapter. But the prose, my girl, the prose was beautiful and poignant for no reason about mowing the lawn. And it reminded me that, like, oh, this is why I like reading. Not necessarily just the story, it's also because the way that they present the story is expanding. I've never thought that much about the politics of mowing the lawn in Russia, but it absolutely changed me. I had to pause the book. I was at a grocery store. I paused the book to just think about him mowing his fucking lawn. That is good prose. That is good literature. That's what I'm talking about here. That one section of Anna Karenina had more impact on me than any book that I read in my fantasy binge. Like, genuinely. Because all of the fantasy books are kind of saying the same thing. Now, I am not saying Anna Karenina is going to do that for you. And if you commit to reading this 58-hour book and blame me when it doesn't change you, I will not be picking up that phone. But I really, really do think that if you find the right book for you, you'll have a similar experience. Some other books that have had this impact on me have been Pachinko, The Count of Monte Cristo, Paradise Rot, the Percy Jackson series. Yeah, really, still. A Tale of Two Cities, the Southern Reach series, and American Gods. Now, I do know that Neil Gaiman is canceled for probably being a sexual predator. But that's also not what this video is about, and I find it to be a little bit disingenuous for me to pretend that that book didn't have a significant impact on me, even with this being true. So I'm leaving it on the list because it did. I'm not going to lie about that. I really hope I've well articulated what I'm trying to. I did my best. My whole intention for this was really just to kind of make a clear differentiation again between I enjoyed this book and this book was good. And also to explain why I think it's important to make that differentiation. This was also intended for the people like me who've been maybe the old guard, I guess, reading like we've been reading for a while. It's not like a lot of people are just getting into reading because it's a little bit trendy, and I think that's great, to be honest. I love a trend that's actually beneficial to people. So if you are that person, I'm so happy that you're here. What I'm trying to do is explain why you may see people like me who've been reading for a long time get so frustrated and upset when we see people giving 5-star ratings to books that are like just objectively not, they don't need a 5-star rating. They just don't. And explaining why that actually does kind of matter and affect the whole literature ecosystem. I hope also that you understand that none of this is a commentary on a person individually. Like, this is not about you. It really isn't. It's not even about me. It's about all of us and what our individual habits do when all, mashed up together. Because do you think you fell out of a coconut tree? You are the result of everything that came before you. Do you think you live in a vacuum? I hope at the very least you're able to understand what I mean by discernment and maybe practice a little bit, just, casually, no pressure, in your next reading journey. If you like this video, great. I'm not going to tell you to like or subscribe because you have free will and you're going to do that anyway if you want to. Bye!